วัสดีครับมีรายการนะครับภาษาไทยเดี๋ยวแป๊บนึงนะOkay, I'm quickly going to speak in Thai and then we'll get back to you with the English episode. Okay, สวัสดีครับสหายคนไทยเราจะบอกว่าขอโทษทีนะวันนี้เรามี EP ภาษาอังกฤษเพราะว่าคุณพัฒนพงศ์นะครับไม่มีเวลาตอนนี้นะครับ Somebody help me out here. What else were we going to say?
แต่ภายใน 2-3 อาทิตย์เราก็จะเริ่มทำตอนภาษาไทยใหม่ครับ
ใช่ครับแล้วก็เรามีแบบEP พิเศษมากนะครับในอนาคตโอเคนะขอบคุณมากครับแล้วขอโทษทีอีกครั้งนะครับ It's good? That was okay?
Nice, that was fine.
Okay.
I'm
right,
sure that's
cool.
fine. You guys like released a written statement too, right?
Nah.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so let's do the English stuff. How to introduce it?
Welcome to Burma Rama points
Welcome
part
to
7.
I think we're only on part 3.
I know.
But we're going to rack up parts pretty soon because of our new favorite comrade, Shunn Lei. Shunn Lei, welcome.
Thank you.
And Shunn Lei is, I'm not really sure how to describe you. I mean, like women's labor activist, number 1, scholar, we can say.
Well, yeah? I don't know if how to define scholar. I don't know.
Well, I've read your scholarly work. And
if you read and write, you're basically a scholar.
Yeah, fuck it.
Okay.
Let's not get you know. What did I say? Yeah, women's labor activist, scholar, and
friend.
All-round good comrade, good friend. Yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm honored to be on this show. I've been listening to Analysin in the last few months, and yeah.
Don't be too honest.
So if you're listening and you want to be on the show, you can do it too.
As long
as you got someone to talk about.
Yeah,
you're more than welcome.
Maybe
relevant, something relevant,
something relevant. Anyway, Shunn Lei is here, and this is, we think, it's going to be a 2-part episode, 2 parts on Burma. At first, we're going to talk about kind of Shunn Lei's experience and impressions on women in Burma. I know that sounds very vague, but generally we kind of want to focus on labor, on the NGO culture in Burma, and generally concepts of feminism from the global south, specifically Southeast Asia, and how they're interconnected and influenced by the West, right? And then the part 2 is going to be more about the current situation in Burma, the new phase of the civil war that's going on there, and the urban insurgencies. And we will get to that next week, or maybe in 2 weeks, I'm not sure. But in the meantime, Shunn Lei, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
So I have been a feminist activist in the last 10 years. So I primarily originally based in Burma, but I travel a lot to different parts of the country. And I work with different marginalized communities across the country. And also I worked with factory workers as well, since majority of the factory workers in the factories workplace are women. So yeah. I'm also a trained documentary filmmaker as well.
And Rainfall as well. Right?
Yeah, Rainfall feminist organization as well, which at the moment we suspended all the activities due to the security reasons on the ground, since my colleagues are staying inside the country. That's basically my background is.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you say working in Burma and then also the rest of the country, because I hope our listeners have listened to the past episode, because what you're referencing there, right, is the autonomous zones and the ethnic minority areas, which we don't really consider to be part of Burma. So that's just a little reminder for people who haven't listened to our past episodes about Burma to go and check those out for some more background. Because we're not going to be doing that much 101 stuff in this episode, I don't think. So to get things started, like we put in the doc, I just wanted like a little bit of historical context, right? Which is like, what I wrote here was how was women's place in Burmese society affected by British colonialism, or like, like in the pre and mid-colonial period, were there any kind of noticeable shifts?
Yeah, so the thing is, there were women involved in the anti-colonial, anti-imperial movement, but the problem is we don't really see, or we don't really know about that part of the history. I don't think a lot of people write about women resistant in the anti-colonial, anti-imperial movement. Like, for example, there were like women soldiers and women, like particularly like women journalists and women writers talking about patriarchal imperialist, system back then. But we rarely heard about these people, these women. And every time we heard about like independence heroes are all these men, right? All these men in uniform. And so I guess the whole history about women resistance since the pre-colonial, colonial time has been erased systematically. So we don't really...
Is that from the junta that kind of came after independence?
What do you mean?
Well, when you say it's been erased, like, not to talk in too many hypotheticals, but let's say like Aung San's movement, didn't get wiped out,
Yeah, I guess it's all kind of different things combined how to erase the women history systematically. I guess it's not only in Burma, I guess it's everywhere in the world, how women history has been erased systematically. Like, we don't really have role models to look at, like, into, or also in terms of like literature and stuff like that. Like, we don't really have literature talking about women resistant, women role models, or stuff like that. So I guess it's since the independence era. I mean,
Just from a social anthropology type situation, historiography, how do you go about sort of collecting stories and information about these people who have been erased? But like, how would you like go and then uncover this information? I'm just curious to know.
It's also interesting, and also the thing is, the problem in Burma, we don't really have like specific documentation or even like oral histories or these kind of historical documents or stuff like that. We don't really have that. And so, like, it's really hard to rediscover these women. And also, well, if I can recommend, I would recommend our listeners and also to both of you, like, to read the book by Dr. Therapitan, Women in Modern Burma. It's really about forgotten women of Burma, like after the post-colonial, post-independence era. So she went and talked about like sex workers and also women soldiers during the communist CPP time, these kind of things. So these are really we don't really have rich ethnographic researches as well, because of like since 1962 military coup, everything has been systematically destroyed, like to do research, to do ethnographic researches, all these documents and stuff like that. So for me personally, when I'm interested in talking to different marginalized women, then I use like different methodologies. I'm also interested in lived experiences of the women. So that's where I started digging up, like talking to different, like older generations as well, different women, like coming from different ethnic background, different religious background. So in that sense, I was trying to reconfigure or rediscover what their lives looked like during, different periods of military dictatorship or military regime or, something like that. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I guess it's like quite painstaking like interviews and stuff like that. Like you don't have those kind of institutions, right?
Yeah.
Which you can turn to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I suppose Samaya as well, and actually you hinted at it in your answer, Shunn Lei, which is I'm very curious about the role of women under the junta post, the coup in 62, was it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is kind of interesting how, as you said, like we don't see any women figures, well, from my perspective looking in anyway, and I should read that book, but then you've got this very, very, Dark Ages kind of era of the junta, and then a woman leader does emerge from it, which is quite surprising, really, and we'll definitely talk about her later, Aung San Suu Kyi. But I'm kind of curious about what the role of women under the junta was. Were there any women in any kind of leadership positions, or did the junta pay any kind of, did they even, put some figureheads in place or something like that?
So women are usually seen as a complementary being to their male counterparts, and during the Junta time, so they like, for example, the wives of these generals, they had these like women's organization that they initiated, but it's more like to be seen women as a caretaker or as a someone who has to give birth for the nation, who has to be vanguard of the culture, race and religion, that kind of image has been promoted throughout the country. And also there's this like popular notion in Burma that women, Burmese women got quite equal status compared to, other countries. Like, for example, they usually pick up like, oh, look at Middle Eastern women, like, so which is totally, which doesn't make sense at all. We have like different patriarchal system in the world that women experience in across the world, right? So, yeah, that's the popular notion. So people will always say like, oh, we have right to divorce, or we have right to marry, or we have right to, right to do stuff that we enjoy. Women are like Burmese women are powerful, the society value them, like that, which puts like feminist activists like us in a much more difficult position because it is like very subtle, right? Like there are like this benevolent sexism and hostile sexism in daily life, but you can't really see them, and everyone is like, oh no, Burmese women, they can enjoy quite a lot of like rights and stuff, other opportunities. They can go out freely, but they don't really see this benevolent sexism in the daily lives, and so which makes it really difficult to talk about. We have like really strong patriarchal traditions in Burma, and that Burmese women are not free, and that we need to talk about emancipatory politics for women, not just like equal rights or gender equalities or not that kind of stuff, but more like emancipation for women. Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting, like in a lot of fascist regimes, they do historically, hold up women as a kind of hero of the nation or something like that, and the mothers of the nation, and there is a lot of credence paid to women, but it's under these very like fascistic terms of like, don't we love our mothers, don't we love the mothers of the nation for making us.
You're just thinking about Handmaid's Tale, man.
Yeah, something like that, right? It's like, while women are venerated, it's in this very kind of eerie fascist way, which is very, very patriarchal and not at all on the actual terms of women themselves, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I don't think you even have to go all the way to like a fascistic state. Like you could just go to any form of like sort of conservative, like kind of like religious-y type situation. Especially like I was thinking about America the whole time, and it's like how Catholics are like, I don't know if that, how Christian conservatives in America are always like, their version of respecting women is about like respecting the women for the sanctity of their body.
The mother.
Yeah, and and like the whole thing with virginity, and then the whole thing with like pregnancy, and then being anti-abortion. Yeah. So like all that stuff sort of reminds me of that kind of thing, too.
Yeah, that's true. So
it's a slippery
for example, slope. That's true. For example, we have like I think that it's from the government, Women's Day. Like, yeah. So all they do is put women dress up in a different ethnic costume, like put makeup, and then like that. So it was like, yeah. It has been a national project, So women should be like this.
Have you tried sexism with a dash of racism yet? I mean.
Yeah, so sexism, racism, classism, they all walk together. So women have to experience these different layers of oppressions, right? So it's not only about sexism, it's also about class, it's also about race as well. So if, like, for example, I come from a Burma, so Burma ethnic, right? So Burma ethnic community and Burma ethnic, family. So Burma, Zaga, like Burmese language has been my primary language, my mother tongue. But so yeah, as a woman, as a universal thing, of course I experience sexism and patriarchal and discrimination against women. But because of I come from this majority ethnic group, so I might not experience other oppressions that other women from different ethnic groups or different religious background experience. So,
and those are experienced quite differently as well, like the way ethnic women are treated. I think we'll get onto it a little later, but it is quite distinct as compared to Burma women.
That's true, yeah.
But going back a little bit, I'm very curious as to how emergent from this system comes Aung San Suu Kyi, right? Because I mean, obviously we can say she has like the family connection with her dad being, the hero of independence. But I mean, from this system, how did such like a all-powerful woman come to supposedly lead the country? And at the same time, like, I'm wondering what these kind of attitudes we're talking about before towards women, like how many of those were placed on her and how were they kind of adapted to fit her position?
So, personally, I really hate this notion of women can't do it.
Yeah.
I literally hate it because that imposes women more on the, like, a lot of burdens, right? So, for example, like, there is this, like, very popular, like, this kind of thing happening in Burma that, oh, you are a working mother. So you can do, like, you can take care of the household, you can take care of your children, you can take care of your husband. Meanwhile, you can be also as successful in your business or whatever in your public life, like that, right? Like, we don't necessarily have to do that. It's sort of like a capitalist bullshit, right? So I think women also see Aung San Suu Kyi maybe a bit of like that. I'm not sure.
She's a girl boss.
Yeah, like that, yeah. Like, exactly, and I'm not a big fan of her. So, so I always see her as part of the problem. And also the thing with her is that she comes from a very privileged family, right? Like her father is this national like hero, or like he brought Bojo Aung San, he brought independence for the country. He fought like he'd fight for it like that, right? So.
And he was a martyr as well,
Yeah, that's true. So I think everyone sees her as, like, she's, like a girl boss, basically. And also they forgot the fact that, well, for me, she's totally foreign state.
Yeah.
I don't know if people pick that up. Like, she's
in the West, I don't think so, yeah.
She's totally foreign for the Burma. She doesn't really understand about Burma. She doesn't really understand about Burmese people's struggle. I think that's why like all the ignorance and arrogance come from her like that, right? Because she doesn't she's totally foreign to the country.
I think maybe we should like explain that a little bit. I mean, she moved abroad when she was pretty young, right?
2 or 4 years old, like that.
Yeah. And she didn't really come back until, I guess she would have been in her 30s around then.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And you know, highly educated abroad and part of this very wealthy overseas diaspora, which was, of course, then also, despite her father fighting for independence, then, you know, very tied in with like the kind of old British colonial class, shall we say?
Yeah.
And she's very much a part of that. And again, like, this is definitely not a notion which people have of her in the West, well, on the majority at least. I'm sure some people are aware, but it's something you hear quite a lot, particularly when you speak to like Burmese lefties like you. People are like, "Oh no, she's totally foreign." But just again, going back a little bit, I'm curious. Like, do you think, again, like, to play hypotheticals, do you think if she was a man, she would be able to like come back into the country and lead this supposed turn to democracy, or do you think that like she harnessed herself as a woman to kind of like play a different character? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you think that kind of emerged?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think the military regime feel more threatened because she's a woman.
Right.
Yeah, I think maybe that's how things turn out differently since like 1988. You know, like before she came back and started leading the whatever opposition democracy movement back then.
And do you think, that could also like play in her favor as well, because like she's seen as more threatening to the military and therefore she gets more support by those anti-military?
In a way, yes. And also, well, to me, I always feel like she is seen as a princess or, you know, as a goddess, not really as a pragmatic opposition leader. You know, so in that sense, I think the opposition movement has been directed in that kind of like personality culture, you know. So I think she has this like, I don't know, this charismatic charismatic personality as well. I remembered once it was a women's forum or something, I think organized by the French embassy, many years ago. Once she walked into the room, everyone like stood up, like, you know, so they didn't have to, but everyone kind of stood up and then like look up to her like she's this famous red carpet celebrity, you know, something like that. So it happened once in the parliament. I think that was back in like 2014 something. And she arrived into the parliament building in the parliamentary session and everyone stood up. And she wasn't even the speaker of the house or, you know. Yeah. She's just a normal, MP, right? From one of these constituency. But everyone, including the soldiers, stood up. Yeah. So she has this, I don't know. She has this aura.
Maybe she's living in the shadow of her dad the whole time.
Maybe, yeah, that was quite strong. Yeah. So in that sense, I think it's also very difficult to criticize her, even I'm sure there are lots of people who dislikes her. So in that sense, I think the whole opposition movement, it should have been more radical, it should have been more critical, but instead it turned out to be more this personality culture like that.
Yeah. And just to shift gears a little bit, and we'll come back to Suu Kyi, but just to get a little bit more context, like you wrote that article, Feminist Movement in Myanmar, and I wanted to talk about something you wrote in the very beginning of that, which I thought was really interesting, which was how the term even feminism is perceived in Burma, right? In relation to the Burmese language. Now, like, my Burmese is really not great, so maybe you could explain that a little bit.
So we don't really have the right translation for the feminist or the word feminism. So in the last 10 years, like after the country is opening up, under the fake democratic transition, people were like, they would be comfortable using the word gender equality or women's rights or women's empowerment, but not feminism or not feminist. and because they see feminist or feminist movement as like radical, but in Burmese sense, radical is negative. I don't know, maybe in English, if someone is radical, we'll be like, oh, that's cool, right?
Well,
I don't know. Well, I'm not sure.
In Supertramp's logical song, radical is a negative word. So
yeah. In different contexts, yeah. But I think in Burmese translation, they would see that more like an extremist. Yeah. Not necessarily being radical or rebellious, but more in a way of extremist. They would label feminists as extremists. So in extreme, like if we translate literally into Burmese, the word extremist is like a son yao. So like really, that's like very negative word. So in that sense, people don't want to associate themselves with the word feminist, and also they don't want to walk or they don't want to build feminist movement. They would rather do these kind of, I don't know if I can say the like neoliberal package, like, women's empowerment, these capacity building programs for disadvantaged women from the conflict or from the IDP camps or refugee camps, like these kind of thing. So they would rather focus on that kind of neoliberal package products rather than building political solidarity with different marginalized and oppressed groups in the country. So that's how the feminism and feminist, the word has been labeled. So for us, when we started talking about feminist movement and when we started identifying ourselves as a feminist, then people would say, oh, we don't want to work with you because you are extremist.
Yeah,
we are like moderate, neutral. We just want to work for gender equality, like that.
I think in your article, I just pulled it up, or your essay, you describe it as the word feminist means in Burmese. It more means like an ideology promoting female dominance rather than, some kind of, what's the right word? Liberation or something.
Yeah.
So again, going back to the article, you mentioned like there's only one member of parliament, or under the previous, in the previous parliament until it was couped, there was only one member of parliament that actually identified as a feminist.
Yeah, that's true. So it's also been difficult for women rights activists to identify themselves as feminist, because once they identify themselves as feminist, then there are going to be a lot of consequences imposed on them, right? Like from the society, oh, you are a feminist, so you are like, you hate men, or you hate, I don't know, like, you hate men, or you are very extreme, or you can't, or you want women in power, like, this domination, like that. So, yeah.
So Suu Kyi never identified as a feminist in Burmese language?
No, I don't think so.
I wonder if she did in English. That would be something interesting to
Yeah.
It's interesting because, like, I'm just thinking about in the UK, when I was growing up, I think the word feminist had quite similar connotations as to what you're describing now, but it's kind of been like, two things have happened, I feel like, and this is just from my, UK perspective, but like, I think the word feminist has been normalized in a sense that you're not considered to be like a, I don't know, women supremacist or something like that if you say you're a feminist in the UK now. But at the same time, I feel like it has been normalized into like the good liberal position, which everybody blanketly has. And then at the same time, that maybe has taken away some kind of radical elements that it may have had before.
Yeah, I would agree on that.
Also, I think another problem with like this mainstream narratives or mainstream discourses, like when we talk about feminism.
Sorry, it's my cat. Yeah.
When we talk about feminism, in Burma, they say, "Oh, it's a Western ideology."
Right.
Yeah, it's So you are importing Western ideology. So that's why it is important to talk about lived experiences rather than copy paste. I don't know, feminist movement or
And that really brings us perfectly onto the other thing. Sorry, postman's here. Okay, thank you. Bye bye. And that really brings us perfectly onto the other thing that I was very eager to talk to you about, which we have spoken about before, but not on the podcast, which is the role of NGOs, particularly women's NGOs. And I was talking to a friend the other day who described it as the NGO industrial complex in Burma.
Yeah.
Like it
we have
really
all
is.
These different industrial complexes.
Yeah.
NGO industrial complex, peace industrial complex.
Yeah. It's big business. It's really big business.
Industrial complex. I mean,
yeah. And I mean, like, I used to live in Cambodia for a little bit, and that was a country which really had to kind of
had a
build
lot of
the civil
work
society.
to do to rebuild itself.
Yeah, like it had to really like start from the ground up to build kind of institutions and what have you, and a lot of them were just imported from abroad. Like the UN mission to Cambodia was one of the biggest ever.
Goddamn UN.
I think it was the biggest at the time, and you can still see that these NGOs in Cambodia like very much do like have formed civil society, and that civil society then has been imported from abroad. And I started working in Burma in, I guess, 2014-15, and I saw it like start. Like, it had already started to form, but I saw it like really kick into gear around that time. What's been your experience with these people? Yeah,
it's been painful.
Yeah.
Because if I remembered correctly, around right after like 2012. So everything's been like, I think everyone has been like positive, like Aung San Suu Kyi has been in the parliament, like NLD, it's in like they can enter the election, like this electoral politics, so everything's been like on track for the democracy transition, and then like the investment and everything. They were also like very hopeful and positive about countries opening up, and they think that the military gonna change, right?
Yeah.
So I think also around that time, many of these like co-optation projects around capacity building or youth leadership or empowerment.
That's the big one.
That's a big one. You can list all these buzzwords as much as you can.
Dirty words.
Yeah. So I think in that sense, it's really backlash for those who want to build radical movement, because most of the activists also they have been co-opted by these neoliberal projects or neoliberal agenda by different international actors as well. Because, well, to be honest, we need resources to do things on the ground as well. And in that sense, we have to compromise. And a lot of time, like, there's also this hierarchy relationship with different international actors and different local actors as well. That's what I find very problematic, because I usually find it like really difficult to talk with them. Like,
could you unpack what you mean there by like international actors as well as local actors?
So like different international organizations started operating or coming in like right after 2012, right? Like different peace or different donors organization, including like US aid, UK aid, or like that, right? And also for sure, yeah. And like also there's this emerging civil society groups around that time as well, because everyone see that's where the opportunities are as well, to engage, to get more exposure by working with different international organizations like that, right? So in that sense, there are a lot of like local activists being co-opted by these different neoliberal agendas as well. Like, you need to, like, you don't have this specific knowledge, or you don't have this specific technical knowledge or technical know-how. So we will come in, we will give you this much funding, you know. So yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to throw out there, like, a lot of, and this might be getting a little bit sidetracked, but you know, a lot of people, when they look at protests in Burma, will say, oh, it's all NED funded, blah 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 blah, and it's like, well, that is kind of true, yeah, but at the same time, groups like NED, USAID, UKAID, they're really the only game in town. Like, to get a salary and to do any kind of work in Burma other than like straight up production work in factories and mines, you're pretty much reliant on Western NGOs, like very fucking evil Western NGOs as well.
Yeah, that's true. So that's personally I find very problematic as well. Like, they come in with like, I don't know, huge chunk of money, right? Like millions of billions of dollars. And then they don't speak the language. They just like maybe arrived from somewhere in the West. And then they just come in like, oh, we speak English, or we have these knowledge, or we have these experiences. So you're going to work on this project, or you're going to do that kind of thing, or we're going to work on these initiatives, which are going to help the locals, you know, to enjoy their rights, to understand, to know, you know, to learn more about their rights and, you know, stuff like that, right? So it's always been like one-way communication. That's what I felt. It's always coming from like these international organizations and these like international actors, right? But not the other way around, where the locals can voice out what they want and how they want the society and how they imagine what kind of society they want to live in after all these years of atrocities and human rights violation and, you know, stuff like that. So many lives has been, well, I think all these international projects or development aids, they fucked up, like, at the cost of the people, to be honest.
There's kind of two things that spring to mind. One of them is that, like, it ironically, it does seem that feminism kind of is there's some truth to it, right? It kind of is an imported ideology. Shunn Lei is nodding, by the way, in Burma in some senses.
In some senses, yeah, of course.
Because the kind of feminism, when we use that word within this context, or when perhaps, you know, more right-wing actors in Burma will use the word feminism in a negative context, the feminism they're referring to, I would say, is like very, very heavily influenced by imports from the West, right?
For me personally, I was introduced to different feminism literature, which primarily written in English. And so the way I understood, yeah, it's important. But I think the job here is to find our own way of resistance and our own way of feminism, what it means in Myanmar context, like Burmese context, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it is important to talk about like lived experiences of different marginalized communities, which has been, I don't know, again, systematically oppressed. Like, yeah.
And as well, like, we're not talking lived experiences in that way that liberals use it. Like,
the liberals co-opted everything.
Yeah, we're trying to contextualize something within a global South context, so we're not talking about that at all. Anyway, but then you said something else earlier as well, which was like, these groups really fucked up, and I think that's very, very true, and it's something which is not really understood outside of Burma. That, and I don't know if you're going to agree with me here, but like the way I perceived the latest coup in February from day one was, no, this is the Tamadar kind of, I mean, there's kind of two factors, right? One of them is, you know, I've talked about this before, like the Tamadar used to have a real run of business, of production, like the cash flow basically in Burma all used to go to their pockets, and then when they opened up economically, that started going out of the country, right? The international sweatshops, companies, mining, stuff like that. But then another thing is this kind of, culture war stuff, which is, from their perspective anyway, and I do feel like, to a degree, that has been another factor in like the way, how to say this, maybe you can, if you agree, you can explain it a bit better, but like the way that these kind of liberal social ideas have been imported is seen by this kind of reactionary, isolationist class, which is the Tamador, has been seen as something they now need to fight back against, which is maybe another reason in their mind for the coup. Do you think that's at all got any truth to it?
I'm not sure about it. I think for me personally, maybe some of the listeners might disagree with me totally. For me personally, the military always been the one that they know what they are doing.
How do you mean?
Like, they never want to, like, I don't think they never want to let go of the power. And also all these 2010, all these like liberalization of economics, liberalization of like politics and everything has been a shit show, to be honest. So I think for me, like at the moment right now, they're the one with like clear in their mind that they know what they are doing. But I think for the opposition groups and, you know, all these resistance groups, we are kind of sidetracked, or we are kind of derailed from what we have been fighting for in the last few decades because of all these different factors, like all these different international actors, and also because of different like frictions and different fractures on the ground because of different ideas and different, you know, thoughts on particular issues, for example, but like issues around Rohingya community. You know, before maybe we might work together, but when it happened, then there are people who like, you know, who are human rights defender, but when Rohingya crisis happened, then they were like, oh no, these are like Bengali, they don't belong here. So it was kind of like a shock for us, and there were a lot of frictions even among us as well. But I think Tamador or military, whatever you called it, right? Like I think they are the one who knows exactly what they are doing. Like, I don't know, they want more power, they want more money in their pocket. So yeah, I don't know if it makes sense. So yeah,
I think I completely agree with you. I don't. Sorry if I wasn't clear, but I wasn't trying to suggest like the Tamador like didn't know what they were doing. Like I think they've always had like, you know, what's the expression? You like loosen the reins a little bit, and now they're just tightening them again, right? And yeah, maybe I didn't articulate my point properly there, but it was like I do feel like the way these Western civil society groups have kind of shifted everything which isn't Tamador support into like their own image has basically worked against these civil society groups and has allowed space for the Tamador to again tighten those reins once again. That's what I think I was trying to say.
Yeah, that's true too. And also I think even among ourselves, like activists and who were once like some human rights defenders, who were once like political prisoners, they were also, I don't know, very optimistic in the last 10 years. I think I don't know if they downplay the military or so when the February 1st coup happened, I didn't quite understand. She wants to be on the podcast too.
She just wants attention.
Is that fluffy or not so fluffy?
That's fluffy. You
fluffy.
Can't really see her. She's just a silhouette. Come here, sweetie. Come on, let's say hello. Come on. Great, I got it. Here she is. There she is.
For our listeners, it's a shame that there's no video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big fluffy girl. Oh shit! She took my headphones out.
So, you know, with in relation to sort of feminism, feminist works, and feminist issues, how would you sort of say that the central sort of Burma relationship to that is versus the sort of the more outside ethnic relationship to that is?
I think so. For example, whenever I go to these periphery areas, like borderlands areas or the different ethnic areas, I think I felt a sense of solidarity already there, because I think that's also their lived experiences, right? It's coming from their lived experiences, being oppressed as an ethnic group for a long time, also being oppressed as a woman, being oppressed as a woman living in IDP camps or refugee camps, like that. So there's already like a sense of solidarity I felt there. Also, I think going to these places, it's really opened my door, like, to understand more about like my positionality as well. I mean, before like last 8 or 9 years ago, I wasn't really a liberal feminist, but we all had that kind of phase that we passed in our lives, right? So especially in a country like Burma where resources are limited, and I wasn't really in favor of like doing advocacy or law changes around gender equalities, women empowerment. I'm not really a big fan of that, or like ever, but going to these places, meeting with different ethnic women, listening to their lived experiences really helped me understand about their more than one issue or one problem about sexism.
I think, just to reiterate, this is something we've said a few times before, and it's a drum I'm constantly banging, and not to just, bash Burma people, but they're really, it's really hard to understate how little knowledge of ethnic issues there is among Burma people, particularly in places like Yangon and Mandalay, and maybe in the rural areas it's more so, actually, I'm not even sure, but there really is like even people, even like Burma people who are pretty well educated and what have you, like they won't even be able to name all of the ethnic armies in Burma. Even they might only be able to name a couple, to be honest, like one or two. Like, I don't know, could you just maybe like
yeah. So also I guess the thing is, see, that's where the military propaganda is very successful in repressing, solidarity, and also in terms of like media and everything, right? Like the popular media, mainstream media, they don't really talk about these other non-state armed groups and the ethnic people, liberation struggles, resistance, like that. And so there's no space for building up the political solidarity among these groups, right?
Or exchange at all, really.
Yeah, that's true. Also, like at schools, we will primarily taught in Burma language, right? So strictly, very strictly. So even like if you are coming from a different ethnic group, like you are forced to talk in Burma language. And so all our curriculum, we learned about Burma kings and Burma, heroes, not particularly about other ethnic heroes in the independence or, like that. So we literally have zero knowledge about other ethnic people's cultures or language or lives or, like that. So we don't really have that kind of exposure in school, also in public life as well. And also, so I always use there's like white supremacy, right? So I always kind of equate Burma supremacy.
I like the term Burma chauvinism. People use that a lot.
Yeah, that's true. So also Burma privilege. I also equate Burma privilege as equal to male privilege as well. So as being born as Burma, sometimes you don't need to ask or you don't need to fight for some rights or some opportunities. They automatically by default comes to you, like that. So there's a lot of, for example, whenever I go to these places, so like for example on my ID card, we have unfortunately we have race and we have religion on our ID card, so that they can easily discriminate it against. So my ID card says Burma and Buddhist, and so for me it's quite easy in terms of mobility as well. So whenever there's like checkpoint, oh, you are Burma, you are Buddhist. So they don't see as a threat to the nation, to the state, security, whatever. But whenever I travel together with my other ethnic friends, then, they looked at all our IDs together. And if there's like a Chin Christian or Guarani Christian.
Or God forbid Muslim.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There would be lots of questions involved. Like, where are you coming from? Where do you live? Why are you going there for work? So that's like a daily lived experience of these people who always traveling, maybe for work or for health purposes or for education. Or, so they always have to deal with these people in uniform, right? Like these military officers, these policemen, like all these different checkpoints. So for me as a Burma, being born and raised in Yangon, I don't have that kind of experience. So only when I went to these places, I went to, borderlands or in ethnic areas, I understood that must have been like living here, right? So whenever you see people with uniform, you're always like afraid. Especially for women, right?
I was going to say, we should talk about the sexual violence.
Especially for women. So one of my friends, she's from Kachin ethnic group, and she asked us, as a Burma women, okay, let me ask you one question. Do you have to be afraid when you see a man with with a soldier uniform with a gun? So that's my lived experiences. I always have to be afraid whenever I go to my field, whenever I go to do my farm activities, whenever I go to school, So I always have to be afraid of them because they might rape me, because using rape as a weapon is also very notorious crime against women in Burma as well. And there are a lot of sexual violence committed by soldiers and armies and stuff like that. So these are the experiences that ethnic women experienced on daily basis. So they have this internal patriarchy, right? From their own society, from their own community. And also they have this state patriarchy. Like these sexual violence and these different oppressions imposed on them because they are ethnic women. Like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I might have told this story before, but I heard it in a couple of different places. Reasons that women end up in refugee camps. I think I heard this twice, and I don't know how common it is, but I was talking to someone who was like, oh yeah, my sister got sent to live in the refugee camp in Thailand because my family thought she was too beautiful. So if she stays in the village, she's going to get raped by a Burmese soldier. Have you heard that before as well?
Yeah, there are lots of similar stories like that, especially in the ethnic areas. So you can imagine being as a Burma feminist activist going to these places, sometimes there are also resentment, right? So, which I find quite strong. And of course, you can't blame the resentment because they have been living in, all these traumas and different emotions, feelings, also these daily oppressions. But also, if I have to bring in, I will bring this class perspective as well. Because, sometimes also among this ethnic liberation, ethnic struggles movement, together with the women resistance, we often forget to talk about class perspective as well.
Frankly, they don't talk about it. I
Yeah.
haven't heard much at all
Yeah.
in ethnic areas,
Yeah.
in autonomous areas.
Yeah. So it's also been quite an eye-opening experience for me when I talk to these women on the ground. So because I think they understand what oppression is, so they quite understand it is important to build political solidarity, no matter where you are from or no matter what class background you are from, what like that. So, but I find it quite difficult to talk about class with other fellow activists.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk about class. I think if we talk about class, then they would I think one of my colleagues, like, she was told, like, oh, it's too dangerous to talk about class, because she brought, she, in the dialogue, in the conversation, she brought up, we need to talk about class. Then, like, everyone was like, oh, that's the, that's
this
the very...
was in an ethnic area?
Well, but not in an ethnic area, but with other ethnic activists, which I don't know if I should say that, like, with other ethnic elite activists, right?
Okay.
So they don't want to talk about class.
Yeah, I think as well, like, the class distinctions, it's very tricky to, in my experience, like, weave class into these kind of conversations about liberation. When I've worked with ethnic minority groups, like, talking about women's liberation is actually maybe a bit easier, because they experience such, extreme sexual violence, and it's so well known and it's so commonplace. And of course, class exploitation, class suffering is as well, but it's, I don't know quite how to phrase it, like, for and I don't want to speak exactly on behalf of ethnic minority people, just give a vibe of what I've heard. But it how to say, the discourse very much seems to be focused on, we get rid of the Tamador or the Burma or the whatever problem, and then after that, okay, maybe we'll have some time to talk about something else. And that actually, like, Shunn Lei's nodding, by the way. And that, like, very much is a good way of understanding, like, the current movement as well. The current revolution, or whatever we're going to call it. There seems to be, like, a really general consensus on get rid of the Tamador, and I don't know, maybe you can tell me in kind of feminist circles as well, do you see something similar, like, in the ethnic areas, like, if we get rid of the Tamador, we'll get rid of, the bulk of the gendered violence or something like that? Or
Yeah, I think that has always been the case, right? So everyone says, yes, of course, the Tamador, the military, the Burma army, the Burmese military, they are the core problem, like, they are the problem. But I think in that sense, what we don't see, or what we choose not to see, is that the other ideologies together with this Tamador, right? So there's, like, racism, sexism, classism, that also embedded in each of our lives as well, through different religious teachings, through different socialization in private life, public life as well, through schools, through universities, through different tests, through different, like, media, like that, right? So I think we can talk more about that in the episode 2, I guess, when we talk about the revolution right now. But I always see, well, Tamador, of course, Tamador is, like, the main problem, but we also have to talk about other ideas and other oppressions that emerge together with the military regime as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it happened in the ethnic areas as well. I think that's why we don't really talk about class particularly, because I think, for example, for me as a Burma, when I started talking about my positionality, my privilege, of course it hurts, right? Because you don't want to give up, or you don't want to give up your privileged position, right? Because you enjoy that. So when I talk about that, of course, I have to also, I don't know, I have to do a lot of self-criticism as well. So I think in that sense, many people, including these more upper middle class ethnic activists, maybe that's why they don't want to. I think that's why they don't want to talk about it, right? If they talk about it, then first they have to do harsh criticism to themselves a lot.
But on this like notion of class, right? And you mentioned sort of not wanting to touch class, and like essentially she doesn't say the word feminism or doesn't talk about her being a feminist, so doesn't even want to touch women's issues, let alone probably class issues. But how come then gaslight, gatekeep, genocide is the way that she's gone? How is it that people who I would argue, don't have much in terms of investigation into her, in the West. How come they've all sort of decided that she is a symbol or a representation of an ideal, of an ideal third world type feminist liberal leader? What does that kind of situation mean to you, and how much do you really hate it?
Well, so everyone looked up to her, I think also it has also to do with the fact that she's a woman, and then I think everyone maybe at that time sees her as she had quite comfortable life in England, she should have stayed there with her family, but she chose to come back like that, right? So I think
when you say everyone, are you referring to the West?
I think
everyone?
Maybe everyone, I guess.
It's funny because I thought I was the most whitewashed person in the world. I mean,
so at that time, for example, in Burma, Burmese people, they were also looking for some kind of hero, right? I don't know, maybe because at that time people were already exhausted, so they were sort of looking for someone who can sort of ease their burden off their shoulder.
About after all the violence in '88.
Yeah. So since then, she's always been regarded as this democracy icon, human rights icon. And also the fact that she had been under house arrest for many years. So I think that quite shocked so many people, right? But of course, I don't want to discount. I mean, as a human being, I don't want to discount her individual struggle, being away from family or whatever, even though I don't like her personally. Mm-hmm. But I mean, being under house arrest for her, well, I don't know. I mean, I've never been under house arrest. I mean, so I don't think I have a position.
You're under house arrest right now.
Yeah. So I don't. Yeah. So I don't have the positionality maybe to talk about. But she's been under house arrest, but she can read books. I mean,
she had visitors.
She had visitors. She can play piano. But meanwhile, other peoples has been under, notorious sentences in prison. Mm. Right, and some of my friends been in the solitary confinement for years and years, right? So in that sense, I think that's where I completely lost everything for her, right? Mm. How could she do that? I personally felt like it's sort of like a betrayal.
Are you kind of referring to what moment are you kind of referring to here? Is it the Hague moment in particular, or?
Well, I guess the Hague moment. Yeah. Yeah. So I sort of felt like I got betrayed.
Yeah.
Right. So I think some other people who close to her, or who has been in the opposition, who has been in the democracy movement, I bet they also felt the same. They got betrayed because they looked up to her, seeing she's the one who's gonna speak against any injustice or, any oppression. But, for example, after 2012, once she's in power, I mean, not in absolute power, but just a fake power that the military gave, right? So, I don't know. I don't know if she enjoyed that, or maybe she's always been like that. I think we just don't see it.
But what about this international perspective of her? Like, how frustrating do you kind of find that?
I think for the international communities, isn't it the way they do it all the time, especially when it comes to the Global South resistance and Global South revolutions and stuff like that? They always pick at one person, and where they can, I don't know, they can co-opt everything to that one person. I don't know. For example, we have all these like human rights awards and these kind of mentions or human rights championships, you know, all these different awards from different countries, right? And I always joke like, I don't know if it's sort of de-radicalized the movement as well, right?
Yeah.
And also, I think when it comes to Aung San Suu Kyi, it's also maybe like that. Like they picked up one person, so like, you know, to kind of impose all these, I don't know, liberal ideas and, you know, yeah. So through her, then, you know, they channel these maybe liberal agendas like that. So I don't know.
It's we've mentioned it before, like a while ago. I can't remember. It was one of the episodes we were talking about the military or something, like the Thai military. So yeah, so you know, the what's it called, like the great man thing, where it's like one person is in charge of like creating substantial change, or like it's rather than it being like a class project in that,
or collective,
a collective like group of people causing things to change. It's like one person is single-handedly dictating, sort of like, because they govern the place. Like again, I mean, I think we've all hit this like 15 times in this episode, but it's all just incredible amounts of liberalism, in that it's this idealist sense of, you know, one person can affect change based on liberal ideals in a liberal parliamentary democracy, when at the end of the day, liberal doesn't go far enough to include issues of class, issues of race, and issues of women's
liberation.
Sorry? Yeah, women's liberation, exactly.
Emancipation.
So you can't have a leader working in a system based on an ideology that doesn't go towards you know, goals that we would like to go towards, and expect this leader to like actually go anywhere without being sort of like pushed, or no, not pushed, but without being praised or pedestalized in a way that creates a narrative saying that they are or they can. You see, I don't know if I'm making much sense, but it's like, fundamentally, she can't do anything to do any good, but she can be presented as someone that can do good, and through that, people will then like say, okay, maybe she's okay.
Well, I think the irony is, like, then you put someone like her, like as Shunn Lei was saying, like you make her into the face of all of this, and then this supposed liberation movement, and then in the end you reach a point where maybe she actually, as an individual, can make a decision, which is whether or not to go to the fucking Hague and defend the Tamador, or just pretend you're ill. Like, you know, there's a million ways she could have gotten out of that one, and she chose to go. And you know, I'm not saying she was good before that or anything, but I'm saying that's just the easiest way we can kind of read her colors, you know. And then, so yeah, you put a whole movement on an individual, and then look what happens when that individual isn't what you were expecting.
I think it's also because like I think for the West, or for these like liberals, they always have like this one person picked up, right? Like that. I think she's the perfect example, or also she's also the perfect individual to pick up. So like to channel all these different ideas that they want to impose on Burma. like, like Burmese democracy should be like this, or, human rights should be like that in Burma, or peace, peace should be like that, or development should be like this. So I think she's a perfect individual to pick up. Like, she's Western educated, she speaks perfect language, so that they can easily communicate with her. And also maybe they see that she's not radical at all. She's never been. So if they pick the wrong individual, then, they would turn back to them and, started talking about more radical stuff, right? But she never did. So in the also in this Rohingya issue, because she's been talking about human rights for years, so they also think, for the Rohingya crisis, we want the world to see like this, or right? I think, for the West, it's not for the sake of the Rohingya. Of course, it never does. But, right? But then when she didn't speak out, then they all got shocked, right? Because maybe they felt like, oh, we picked up the wrong individual. So, yeah. And, so in that sense, I think, she's always been like that, and they just don't see it. And also for Burmese people, I think for me personally, she always been military apologist.
Hot take. Okay, next episode we'll talk about that.
So, if you look back to her speeches back in 1988.
Okay.
UAC, she
this
always...
This is too juicy, yeah.
I know. She always loved military.
Way to bury
she
the
always
lead.
she always refer military as her father's military, right? My father at Thermidor, because, given all the anti-colonial
his daddy
movement.
issues,
so,
his daddy
issues. My daddy's Thermidor, so,
On that note, let's call it a day for today. And thank Shunn Lei very much for joining us, and looking forward to talking later
Part
in
2,
the week.
Electric Boogaloo.
Thanks.
Part 2.
Yeah, thanks for both of you too.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
And maybe we'll do this as an announcement in the next one,
yes.
Or I'll just record it now just in case. Shunn Lei is also starting a podcast with another comrade from Burma. I don't know when that's going to actually happen.
We will see how it goes.
We will see. Okay. Inshallah. So yeah, if there's any formation of that before this has come out, we'll put the link in the description. So once again, Shunn Lei, thank you.
Also, please don't forget to go to dindang.com/support. Sorry, dindang.com/support and give us money.
Also, we're now encrypted. I've encrypted the website. It took a lot of fucking work.
Please,
I'm very proud of myself.
Please give Gabriel a little something for his work. He works very hard.
Okay, thank you, listeners. Bye-bye.
Bye.